Hi, I'm so sorry. I know I haven't recorded in a while. I was home with my family and then I got really sick. But I'm fine now. Well, not really sick, but sick. Anyway, we're on to chapter 5, part 2. Not much happened in part 1, except for the fact that Gage doesn't know that he could, rub one out when he's horny. Uh, yeah, so we'll get right into it. You didn't really miss much. As a recap, Zach went to go and get donuts, and that's kind of where we start off. It turned out that Zach had been right about the donuts. The SWAT guys did indeed eat donuts voraciously. She had been shocked when her friend had walked into the training classroom with 6 boxes of assorted death by sugar bribes. It was one thing trying to get on someone's good side, but it was another to do it so blatantly or with that many donuts. That was crazy. But it was kind of scary the way the men ripped into the boxes. They'd cleaned out 3 boxes before she even picked through them, looking for something with sprinkles on it. Did they eat them like a pack of animals? Zach looked at her smugly. She ignored him. After the donuts were gone, Xander and Mike gave the training briefing. She and Gage sat in the back of the classroom so he could explain what was going on. "This is a standard hostage training scenario for us," Gage said softly in her ear. His breath felt deliciously warm against her neck. "Xander's team will play the part of the bad guys, while your photographer will play the part of the hostage." Mac almost laughed. Zach wasn't going to like that. Then again, he might. He seemed psyched about the idea. Probably all those video games he played. "I thought Miss Stone could be the hostage," Becker said, half turning in his seat to give her an expectant look. Give her a better perspective on how we operate." This guy's not very insightful, is he? Miss Stone, the rest of the men nodded in agreement. "Miss Stone won't be taking part in the training exercise," Xander said firmly, "but she will be sticking her head in occasionally to watch, so you might want to pay attention to the briefing. That way you won't make idiots of yourselves when she happens to look your way." A few of the men laughed, but Becker looked positively glum. It was enough to make Mac feel bad. She leaned over to whispered in Gage's ear. "I guess we could put off our shooting lesson for a little while, if it would help. I can play a very convincing hostage." The muscle in Gage's jaw flexed. "Zach will work fine as the hostage. Besides, Becker just wants to see you tied to a chair, squirming to get loose. I think he has a thing for you." Mac laughed until she caught Becker studying her. And he wasn't the only one. She wouldn't go so far as to say their looks were predatory, but she could have sworn the temperature in the training room jumped up 3 or 4 degrees. She didn't mind being the center of attention in a room full of hot guys, but this was a little more than she might be ready for. That's scary as fuck right there. Not okay. Totally not okay, guys. Not okay. She looked at Gage. "Maybe it's time for that shooting lesson?" "Good idea." He swept the room with his gaze. "Miss Stone and I will be down at the lower shooting range. You probably should stay well clear of that part of the compound. I wouldn't want an errant shot going wide and putting a hole through any of you." As they left the training building and headed for the armory, Mac gave Gage a sidelong look. "You guys really need to spend more time around the opposite sex. You ever thought about getting a few women on the team? Maybe mellow them out a little bit?" They don't have fucking mothers or fucking sisters or nieces or whatever? Like, are you kidding me right now? They should just act like normal fucking human beings with women. She meant it as a joke, but Gage must have thought she was serious. "I've considered it, but it's damn hard finding women who can fit the specific requirements I've put in place for the team. I'm always looking, though." When they got to the armory, Mac leaned back against the counter and watched as Gage took several pistols and boxes of ammo from one of the safes and packed them into a soft-sided bag about the size of a carry-on. "Are you really that worried I'm a bad shot?" she asked, enjoying the view as he bent over to pull out some hearing protection. Damn, what she wouldn't give to see him do that naked. See Gage bent over naked? Is she into pegging? I mean, to each their own. Who am I to say? He turned to give her a curious look. "No, why?" "Well, you warned everyone to stay away from the shooting range. I figured you were worried I'd miss the target and accidentally hit someone." She tried to sound casual about it, but honestly she was a little concerned about the possibility of screwing up. Gage picked up the bag, then held open the door for her. "I never said you'd be the one shooting them." She glanced at him out of the corner of her eye as they walked along the sandy path to the shooting range he'd pointed out the day before. So you were just making sure we had some privacy? He grinned. I thought you might be more relaxed if it was just the two of us. She smiled back at him, keenly aware of the familiar heat swirling in her tummy again. Oh God, why tummy, why? I have never once, ever said, oh, there's heat swirling in my tummy. No, not okay. Shit, there's a lot of stuff in this fucking chapter that's not okay. But that, no. I've always said, oh, my tummy hurts. That's it. Target shooting as a form of foreplay? Who knew? Gage stood behind Mackenzie, steadying her arms as she aimed the small .22 automatic he'd started her on. She was actually better at this than she'd given herself credit for, especially when she realized that not every handgun was so powerful it put her on her ass to fire it. The .22 was a perfect gun for her because it wasn't too loud, didn't have much recoil, and was easy to aim. And now that she'd figured it out, she was starting to enjoy herself. He knew. He sure as hell was. Mostly because Mackenzie had a bad habit of leaning forward when she pulled the trigger. It helped her line up the sights, but made for an unstable shooting base. On the bright side, her unorthodox stance did cause her butt to stick out nicely. And as close as he was standing, that ass of hers was doing some interesting things to his focus as well. At first he tried to keep his rapidly hardening cock from grazing her bottom, but that quickly became impossible. He was simply standing too close. He would have felt bad about getting hard during a shooting lesson if it wasn't for the fact that Mackenzie was just as turned on as he was, maybe more so. He knew because he could smell her arousal, that uniquely feminine scent that was so heady and overwhelming that it was almost hard to see straight, much less instruct her in the finer points of handgun use. Worst, his mind kept slipping to the idea of how much better she'd smell if she was naked. It'd probably bring him to his knees. He swallowed a groan and tried not to think about it. Yeah, like that was going to work. His hard-on was threatening to rip through the front of his uniform pants to get closer to her. He wasn't doing a good job of thinking about anything but how tempting Mackenzie smelled. After coming downstairs and finding Mackenzie's scent all over the filing room, he'd realized that last night's dinner had done nothing to dissuade her from pursuing her story. He'd known right then that he'd be spending the next several days working his ass off to keep her distracted. Of course, he'd assumed he'd spend the time distracting her the old-fashioned way, not the sexual way. But hey, this was much better anyway. What's distracting someone the old-fashioned way? Deceit? I don't think I'm doing this right, Mackenzie complained. I've only hit the target a few times. She fired the last bullet in the clip, missing again. He reluctantly moved away from her to reload the magazine. He would reload the 4 others she'd already fired while he was at it. She loved the little .22 and had gone through the first 50 rounds and nothing flat. You're doing better than you think. It's just that the bullet holes are so small, you can't see the holes in the target. You can? She squinted at the target. God, her face was so cute when she scrunched it up like that. Yeah, he said, but it's just because I've been doing this for a while. Trust me, you're putting almost all your shots on the paper. She picked up one of the magazines and loaded it, her hands moving more confidently than they had the first time. Yeah, but I was aiming for the center of the target. What am I doing wrong? He watched as she slid the magazine back in the pistol and released the receiver. Damn, she was getting good at that. Let's see how you shoot this magazine. Then I'll give you some ideas on how you can improve. Gage took up the guide position behind her that he'd been in before. Mackenzie didn't complain. Hell, if anything, she pushed her jean-clad ass back a little more than necessary, just so they'd be in close contact. It's not sexy, you guys. It's not doing anything for me. Man, this woman was dangerous. She could turn him to mush with no effort at all. The scary part was that he could actually feel that tingling in his gums that told him his fangs were trying to slip out. Her mind-numbing scent practically had him on the edge of losing control. Damn, he hadn't experienced control issues like this since he first turned years ago, and if her rapidly beating heart was any indication, this attraction wasn't all one-sided. She was feeling the same way. He thought so last night, but he hadn't been sure of anything until they'd gotten on the range. He had to admit he'd been jealous as hell when Mike told him Mackenzie had brought some guy with her that morning, for some stupid reason that had pissed him off. Yeah, fucking stupid. He'd been out of his seat and headed for the gate before he even knew what he was doing. The moment he laid his eyes on Zack, though, his anger had disappeared. In a way only a werewolf could know, Zack had friend written all over him. I don't know. I mean, I would have a snarky comment for this, but fuck you, Gage. That was when Gage knew Mackenzie Stone had gotten to him. Okay, he said, loud enough for her to hear over the sound of the pistol. Stop for a minute. I know what you're doing wrong. He reached around and put his hand under hers, supporting the lightweight weapon. First of all, you're not breathing like I told you to. Take a deep breath and let it half out. Pause, then shoot. Mackenzie practiced breathing deep like that for a few times, which made for an enjoyable view of her expanding t-shirt. He barely stifled the groan this time. God save him. This next part is critical. He moved his mouth closer to her muff-covered ears so he wouldn't have to shout. You're jerking too hard. She turned her head to give him a teasing smile. Jerking too hard? Is that even possible? Okay, maybe picking a word that had such a sexual connotation hadn't been the best idea. Oh yeah, it's possible, and you're doing it. Huh. So can you show me the proper way I should be jerking it? Gage groaned. Thank God none of the guys were close enough to hear this little exchange. He'd never live it down. He repositioned her fingers around the grip, then moved her left hand into a better position to support the weapon. Remember to squeeze it firmly, but not hard. You want your grip to be tight enough that it won't pop out when it bucks, but not so tight that your fingers get tired. Wouldn't want my fingers to get tired, she agreed. Okay, now what? Just shoot? This dialogue is so fucking terrible. No, not yet. You've got the breathing and the grip down. Now I have to make sure you know how to stroke the trigger. That flirty smile of hers was back. You're making this up, right? Absolutely not. These are time-honored shooting tips that everyone in the SWAT learns. Uh-huh. She looked down the barrel of the .22 again. So, are you going to share those tips, or do I just have to guess? You can't rush these things. He pressed himself more tightly against her and put his mouth closer to her ear. He was about to tell her to tighten her grip on the pistol when he felt her bottom moving slightly side to side, like she was shifting her weight from foot to foot. It might have been completely subconscious effort to get more comfortable, but it sure as hell seemed like she was purposely rubbing her ass against his hard-on. I don't think I've ever done that, guys. I don't think I've ever done that. He immediately went from really freaking hard to painfully stiff in a span of a few heartbeats. What does that even mean? What does that mean? How do you go from really hard to painfully stiff? I'm not a guy. You guys are going to have to let me know. I mean, how does that work? Which only seemed to encourage Mackenzie more. Damn, it was all he could do not to drop his hands down to her hips and pull her ass tightly against him. Then he realized that Mackenzie's breath was coming faster. For a moment he wondered if she was going to start panting. That's terrible. It was the tips of his fangs pressing into his tongue that jerked him out of his trance and forced him to get control of himself and the situation. Yeah, Mackenzie was amazing, but he had to remember that what was at stake here. His pack was depending on him to deal with this woman. He backed off an inch or two, enough to break the contact between her butt and his groin. That also broke the almost hypnotic hold that she seemed to have on him. He ignored what could have been a moan of disappointment and leaned his mouth against her ear once again, ready to get back to the task they were supposed to be here for. It was tough, but controlling emotions was part of being a werewolf. Get a firm grip on the weapon, then take a breath and let it out halfway. He waited until he felt her breath hitch. Now slowly caress the trigger. Don't squeeze it. You should be completely surprised when it goes off. The gun still jumped in her hand, but she had a better grip this time, so it didn't move nearly as much as before. I was told that these are perfectly good techniques on learning how to shoot. And this is for someone who knows how to shoot. I hit the target dead center. He couldn't help but smile with her. Yes, you did. Now do it again. She breathed deep, took her time, and put every shot through the 9 ring. When she'd emptied the magazine, she set the pistol down on the counter and spun around in his arms, hugging him with a breathless laugh. I did it. Even though he knew he shouldn't, Gage found himself automatically wrapping his arms around her. Her breasts were soft against his chest, her hips enticing, and her lips. The way they were parted, it was like they were begging to be kissed. God, he could almost taste them. Something told him one kiss wouldn't be enough, but he was willing to take the risk. He might have done it too, but luckily she pulled away. I want to do it again, she said excitedly. Okay, he laughed, unless I want to. The way she was looking at him almost made him forget again that she was here looking for a story that could destroy his life and the lives of his packs. Womp womp. And just like that, Gage felt the stirrings of a foolish emotion he shouldn't be feeling right now. Definitely not this fast, and definitely not for this woman. Is it love? Is it love, you guys? He reached around, picking up the 9mm he brought with him. Or we could try something a little bigger. Her lips curved. You think I can handle something bigger? He turned her around so that her ass was pressed snugly against him, then placed the 9mm in her hands and aimed it at the target. Something tells me you can handle just about anything. Mac had no idea target shooting could be so much fun, but she was hooked. She was already thinking about the kind of handgun she would buy for herself. She adored the .22 she fired first, but the 9mm had been so fun. And Gage had told her that most of the well-known manufacturers even had model lines specifically for women, with accessories like pink hand grips. She was definitely getting one of those. Really? Are you fucking kidding me? She wants a gun with a pink hand grip. Why? Why? I can't even bring myself to be properly outraged. But really, that couldn't have made her any more girly. She wanted to tell Zach about her shooting lesson, but everyone around the handful of tables the restaurant staff had pushed together for the SWAT team in the large back room of the steakhouse had a story to tell, and Zach was talking louder than any of them. It turned out that in order to escape the horrible villains holding him hostage, Zach had to take a more active role than expected of an average hostage. Mac couldn't stop laughing as Zach described how he'd been cut loose by some of the guys on Mike's squad, then crawled out of the dark building on his hands and knees only to find himself on the roof. Then he'd been taught enough about rappelling. I don't know why I have a hard time with that word. To lower himself down to the ground. Unfortunately, just when it seemed that he'd gotten away safely, Xander's squad had reappeared and started shooting at him with paintball guns. Zach, who was covered from head to toe in orange paint, had picked up a weapon when one of Mike's team had gone down and helped the team fight their way to freedom. Oh, when one of Mike's team members had gone down. It's missing a word. I have to admit, I didn't think you had it in you, Mike said to Zach, but you did good. Everyone around the table applauded, including Mac. She wasn't sure how much training the guys had accomplished that morning, considering that paintball was involved, but it sounded like they had fun. Did you know they were going to do that, Zach? She whispered to Zach. She whispered to Gage. I figured they'd do something to have a little fun with him, but I didn't think they'd break out the paintball guns, he said. They only do that when they think a person can handle it. Your photographer must have had a little actioneer in him. She laughed. I wouldn't have figured that in 100 years, but I guess so. 2 waitresses came to take their orders, which reduced the noise around the table to a mild roar. When Gage leaned in to tell her about something on the menu, he still had to put his mouth close to her ear. The feel of his warm breath on her skin made her shiver, and she closed her eyes until it passed. When she opened them, Mac saw that Zach was smiling at her from the other side of the table. She stuck out her tongue at him. What was that about? Gage asked. She turned and leaned in close again, enjoying the feeling of heat coming off his skin. If it were anyone else, she'd think he'd have a fever, but instinct told her Gage ran hot. Nothing. I was just thinking that I really owe you one for the shooting lesson. You don't owe me anything, he grinned. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. Oh, she'd enjoyed herself. If she thought he'd gotten her hot and bothered last night, that was nothing in comparison to what it was like to have Gage's big arms around her and his hard-on pressing into her ass as she practiced shooting targets. Thank God she had to keep both hands wrapped around the pistol, or she might have been tempted to touch herself, or him. Holy shit. It was official. Gage Dixon could arouse her just by being near her. Something else was official, too. She was seriously close to tanking the story idea. She was so crazy about Gage that she was ready to ignore anything he'd ever done wrong short of a felony. And from the way Zach was laughing and joking with the SWAT officers at the table, he'd agree with her. Maybe she'd do a story on the day in the life of the men who made up the SWAT unit and leave it at that. The men tore into their meals with the same gusto they'd attacked the donuts that morning. Do these men not know how to fucking eat like, civilized human beings? Mac didn't know whether to laugh or shake her head. They ate like a pack of wild animals. She was still cutting her baked chicken and steamed vegetables when the whole table suddenly fell silent. She looked up, watching as each of the men set their forks and knives down as if they were done eating, which didn't make sense, not with that much food left on their plates. What was going on? That's not fucking suspicious at all, guys. Not at all. She gave Zach a questioning look, but he seemed just as confused as she did. Mac turned to ask Gage, but the words died on her lips as 8 men strode into the room. She wasn't sure how it was possible, but something told her they were the reason the SWAT guys suddenly went on high alert. Despite their expensive suits and clean-cut looks, the men were trouble. She'd seen enough men like them in her line of work to be sure of that. They spread out along the wall behind her, surrounding the table while at the same time blocking the doorway. Mac's heart kicked into high gear as she caught a glimpse of the pistol underneath the coat of the man closest to her. "I'm looking for Gage Dixon," the man with the gun said. Gage was on his feet before Mac even saw him move. A single step put him inches away from the man, making their difference in height immediately apparent. The guy in the suit backed up almost involuntarily. "It's your lucky day, then," Gage said in a much calmer voice than she would have managed. "You found him." "I need you to come with me," the man said. "I'm in the middle of lunch." The man's lip curled. "That's too damn bad. The man I work for wants to talk to you." When Gage didn't say anything, the man opened his jacket to show him a large handgun in an underarm holster. Now. Crap. Mac knew she'd seen the man somewhere, but couldn't remember where until now. His name was Roscoe Patterson, and he was Walter Hardy's enforcer. She had to warn Gage. She started to get to her feet, but Xander pulled her back down and shook his head. What the hell? How could he and the rest of the SWAT team just sit there while Hardy's thugs dragged Gage out of the restaurant? She whirled around in her seat just in time to see Patterson put his hand on Gage's shoulder and push him toward the door. But Gage didn't go anywhere. He didn't move at all. "I said I'm in the middle of lunch. If you give me a name and address, I'll stop by and see your boss when I get the chance." Patterson's eyes narrowed. "Are you stupid? I have a gun." "Yeah, I noticed that," Gage said. "Funny thing about guns, they don't work if they're shoved up your ass." Mac was glad she hadn't eaten anything yet because her stomach was in one big knot. She didn't know Patterson very well, but he looked like the kind of guy who wouldn't be afraid to pull his gun and shoot Gage right there in front of 15 other cops. But Gage didn't give him the chance. He grabbed Patterson by the front of his suit jacket and shoved him against the wall. The rest of Hardy's thugs scrambled for their guns, only to freeze when every cop at the table drew their weapon and aimed it in their direction. Mac did a double take. How did the SWAT guys move so fast? She couldn't see Gage's face because his back was to her now, but the look he gave Patterson must have scared the hell out of him because the man went white. "That's the problem with guns these days," Gage said softly. "Everybody's got one." Holding Patterson still with one hand, he reached under the man's jacket with the other, and came out with the flashy automatic. It looked a little bigger. Sorry. It looked a little like the 9mm she'd fired that morning, only bigger. "You should probably leave now," Gage released Patterson. "If you feel like getting this back, you can come by the compound for it. I'm sure you know where it is." Patterson swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the room, a frown creasing his brow as if he couldn't understand how the tables had turned so quickly on him and his men. "Because these are fucking SWAT team members, and there's 15 of them, whereas there's only 8 of these fucking idiots? This is so stupid. This is so fucking stupid." He gave them a nod and jerked his head toward the door. They hesitated, but they slowly filed out. Patterson made a show of straightening his jacket and headed for the door. Once there, though, he stopped to fix Gage with a glare. "Yeah, I know," Gage said before the other man could speak. "I'll regret this. I'll be sorry. This isn't over. Whatever. Get out." He didn't wait to see if Patterson followed orders, but instead walked back to the table and sat down beside Mac. She watched over her shoulder as Hardy's enforcer stormed out of the room. Then she turned around. It was to find Gage reaching for the bottle of steak sauce. He gave Xander an accusing look as he took off the cap. "Did you drink this or something? It was full just a second ago." "Wasn't me." Xander grabbed the bottle in front of Delaney and reached across her to hand it to Gage. "It was empty before I got it." And just like that, everyone started arguing, one side talking about who'd hogged all the steak sauce, while the other debated why anyone would ruin a perfectly good steak with the stuff to begin with. Max stared at them. How could they sit there and debate the merits of steak sauce as if nothing had happened? Didn't they realize that any one of them could have been shot a minute ago? "Aren't you going to do something?" she asked Gage. For a bunch of guys who don't want her to write a story on them, they're making it really fucking hard. He stopped cutting his steak to look at her. "What do you think I should do? Arrest them?" "Well, yeah." She would have thought that it was obvious. They had guns and they threatened you. He went back to cutting his steak. "This is Texas. Everyone has guns. But they never actually pulled their weapons or even said that they were going to hurt me. They simply said their boss wanted to talk to me. That's all. Nothing there to warrant an arrest." "Nothing there? Those men work for Hardy." His hand still on the knife, the muscle in his jaw flexing. At least he wasn't taking this as lightly as it seemed. "It doesn't change anything." How the heck could he be so calm about this? There was a rich, powerful, violent man out there who blamed SWAT for the death of his son, and Gage was the face of SWAT. "They'll come after you again, she said quietly. "You know that, right?" "Then I'll be ready for them." He sounded so casual about the whole thing, it made her want to scream. Mac pushed her plate away. She'd lost her appetite. Gage might have dealt with Patterson, but that wouldn't be the end of it. Hardy was coming for him, and now he'd be even more determined than before. And for some reason that scared her more than if the man had been after her. Alright. So that's the end of chapter 5. Oh my god, this chapter. This fucking chapter. Chapter 6 will be tomorrow, I promise. It's only 9 pages long, so we can totally get through it in one session. We don't have to break it up. I hope you enjoyed the rest of this chapter. Let me know if it did anything for you. Didn't do anything for me. I didn't find any of it sexy. Anyway, have a great night.